which takes scientists and engineers and places them in government offices, but does not have any specific agenda beyond improving the civil service and including more data-based approach. The Society was interested in taking this model, translating it to be relevant to Israel, but also giving it a specific environmental focus. So, kind of what makes Mimshak, what are its goals? Essentially what Mimshak does is, first, it selects skilled and motivated PhDs from all fields, natural sciences, humanities, social sciences. They can be right after their PhD or several years after. It trains them largely in policy making because that's not their background, but also to know as much as possible about all fields of environment. Places them in government offices paired with mentors who are high-ranking officials within the government offices. And through this, it influences the Israeli government to be more evidence-based, more science-based, and to have a larger focus on environmental issues. And last but not least, the program also creates a network between the fellows in each year and the alumni from previous years to keep advancing these goals. How does that actually look? This is the process from beginning to end. I will touch on a few points here. First, you start with the selection process. I'm not going to go into it too far. It is a very exhaustive selection process. I'm sure I would be happy to elaborate to anyone who's interested. But you could say it's basically broken down to three parts. First, there's a selection of the fellows themselves. The program receives several hundred applications each year and needs to select a handful. We are 13 fellows in our cohort. So there's a process to find the people that the candidates that the society feels will be the best fellows for the program. But in parallel, there's another process of selecting the mentors. It did not take long after the program started for many government officials to realize that they wanted a Mimshak fellow in their office and they could give them a lot. So the society also, the program also receives many applications from potential mentors on the government side and needs to also choose those which they think can offer most to the fellow, can offer the projects in which the fellow can do the most, can be good mentors in the public sphere for the fellow. And once you have this group of mentors and this group of fellows, you need to match between them. So it's the third part of the process, finding the best connections between these people. Once you're finished with that, you have your cohort, you have your group of fellows who know where they're going into, and that's when the program actually begins. It begins with an orientation that's a 7 to 8 day away from home, very intensive period, which has two central goals. The first is to form connections within the group, within the cohort of fellows, and also with the staff, to get them to know each other on a very deep level very quickly, because the connections within this group are vital to the success of the program. And the other aspect is actually the beginning of a training program that continues for the entire year to learn more about the topics that some of the fellows know more, some know less. Many of them none of us knew about. This is us beginning our concentrated course in economics, which I don't think any of us had much of a background in. All of these things that we need to really be able to connect our academic background with the things we were doing in the offices. And once this orientation is finished, that's when the fellows actually go into the government offices. Here I'll move away from the presentation for a minute because some things can't be explained with pretty pictures, but how does this actually work? What does a fellow do? So the fellows come into their offices, and they can be in all kinds of ministries you'll see later, and what happens then varies widely. On the one hand, you can have fellows who go into their office already knowing what their projects are going to be, what needs to be done in those projects, and exactly what is expected of them. On the other end of the spectrum, you can have fellows who come in and their mentor tells them, join in meetings, get an idea of what we're doing here, talk to me in a couple of weeks and tell me what you want to do, and anything in between those. You hear about this program, you hear scientists in government offices, so you assume that what the fellows do is kind of do research within the office and show the data to their superiors and get that to be involved, and there is a lot of that going on. You could have a fellow who's, say, a data scientist going into an office that does not have experience working with big data and could gain a lot from it, and they might set up a program for data analysis that will really help the office and will continue on. or someone with a specific area of expertise bringing that into the office, but that's not all that a Mimshak fellow might do. Mimshak fellows are involved in writing policy papers, in roundtables and expert committees. They can be involved in inter-office collaborations. Essentially, anything that their mentor is willing to involve them in, a Mimshak fellow will go into. The two things that all fellows have in common is that they need these two things, which is very fast learning ability, learning on the job very quickly. The program is only 1 year long, and that's a very short time, definitely in government terms. The other thing is flexibility. The things that you start off the year with might not be the things that you end up focusing on at the end of the year, and the thing you're working on today might not be what you're working on tomorrow. You could be sitting in your office writing a policy paper by yourself in a little square gray government office, and the next day be in a conference room with the heads of different ministries fighting over some bit of environmental policy, so we need to stay on our toes. 3 important points. Throughout the year, 1 workday is devoted to the continuation of the training program, so the fellows are in the offices 4 days a week. It's important to note that the fellows are not government employees. The program is a joint program between the government and the Society of Ecology and Environmental Sciences, but officially, we are not government employees. We are volunteers who also receive a scholarship. That has its disadvantages, as you imagine, but it also sometimes gives us the advantage of being able to do some things that regular employees maybe couldn't get away with, just because we're not technically employed by the offices. And we're involved, as I said, on all levels. Anywhere that the mentors are willing to put us, we can get involved, get our hands dirty on every level of policy making. That's a bit about the office work, and as I said, in parallel to that, there's a training program. So it consists of the weekly meetings, that's the 5th day a week, which will are learning days where we learn on things on policy, on other elements that we might not know about. For example, this was a small workshop we did on planning. Some of us have a background in planning, some of us don't. But that goes on throughout the year. There are 2 multi-day workshops. One is a leadership workshop in the desert, because what's the point of living in Israel if you can't swing around on ropes in the desert? And the other is a communications workshop where the fellows learn such things as how to be interviewed for TV, how to write articles for the press, how to present better, everything that will make us better at our job, for daily excursions on topics that the fellows themselves select and organize. And this year, for the first time, a delegation abroad. We are very excited to be the first. It was supposed to happen last year, and guess what? It didn't. So we get that. That advantage. But I will say that the delegation was affected, of course, by COVID. I think we could have wished that it happened earlier in the program. But we think that there are 3 goals for us from this delegation. The first is to learn. And we have already learned a lot, and we hope to make that work also in what remains of our time in the program, but also later on in our careers. The second is to increase communication between Israel and the host country, and we've gotten a lot of interest on this trip. People really want to work on collaborations. And the third is the reason I'm standing here now, to kind of also spread the word of the program. We think we have a very special program that has a lot to teach. It's done a lot, and I'll give you some taste of the different achievements of the program. But I think that if not copy-pasted, it's still even things based on this program could have a lot of potential in other countries. And as I said, an important part of the program is a very strong alumni program. It can be just meetings, catching up on topics that interest the alumni. Sometimes it's more involved. For example, here is a group of alumni traveling to the US to meet with colleagues from the AAAS and talk about the respective programs and the advantages and disadvantages of them. But probably more important than any of this is just the network. There are, I believe, 2 WhatsApp groups, is that right, for the 3? For Mimshak alumni, and these are people who by now are very influential in spheres of government, of environment, of academia, people with knowledge on everything under the sun, and this network is an incredibly powerful tool to keep working on improving environmental action in Israel. So that's kind of the whole process, and I do want to talk briefly on kind of a few numbers, a few achievements of Mimshak over the years. So including this cohort, 102 fellows and alumni over 10 years in 18 different government offices. And it's not just what you would expect. Yeah, there's the Ministry of Environmental Protection here, Ministry of Energy, but also things like welfare, also things like the tax authority, also things like the Ministry of Health. So we've had fellows in all of these, and anywhere that would be interested in having a Mimshak fellow, the program would consider it, because everything in the end touches on environmental policy. Out of the alumni, out of 89, 43 are now in government positions, but the number in public service is actually higher if you include local government and various government-related bodies. There are alumni in the private sector who advise government policy, so a very high retention rate within the policymaking system. And as far as the products of the fellows themselves during this one-year program, dozens of policy papers, roundtables, collaborations, and these projects, whether they're one fellow working alone or collaborations between several fellows, often create major shifts in policy. They're often the starting point for very big changes. Just a few brief examples. This is a paper written by a fellow from the third cohort about extracting energy from waste biomass, something that Denmark knows a lot about and Israel is still figuring out. This is an analysis of the implications of smart and electric vehicles on Israel. And this is actually an interesting story. This is a paper written by 4 fellows across 2 cohorts. So year after year, they continued this process, working on remote work from government offices. And this was a project started in 2018. They got together experts, they put together committees, and wrote this very, very serious and involved paper giving a real kind of framework for remote work from government offices, but they didn't know how much it would actually be used. Their wildest dreams, they thought there might be a pilot of 50 or 100 employees. And then COVID hit. And the fellows in the second cohort in 2020 could come up and say, suddenly work from home was something that needed to happen. The government did not know how it was going to do this. And the fellows from this cohort could say, look, we've got this booklet here. It's a good 50-page thing. Take this, work with it. And that is exactly what happened. And Israel's remote work was very much based on this. But I can't not show off a bit of the achievements of our own cohort. I won't get everyone here, but just some examples. So just a week ago, I believe, led a roundtable on the challenges to STEM education in disadvantaged communities in Israel. This is a work by 4 of the fellows sitting here about energy communities and their potential for Israel. Again, something they've been very excited to learn about here in Denmark. What's interesting is that they come from 4 different offices: environmental protection, energy, welfare, and the Prime Minister's office, each bringing their own angle on this issue and getting these 4 very different ministries involved in this project together. And we've also actually been in the press a few times, whether it's articles written by a fellow, like this one written by Iris about energy communities, or this one by Ben about what Israel could learn from the flooding in Europe this past winter. Then there are also other situations like this one. This was a joint work by 4 different fellows sitting here, working on groundwater management, and made a case study of a new city in Israel that it turns out did a terrible job planning for rainfall. It caused a lot of floods, and this was presented internally, but a journalist got wind of it, published it, and not everyone was very happy about that, but now the Israeli public knows a little bit more about how far we have to go with that, so you can say that we've been making waves. And that's it. I hope I touched a bit on who we are, what we do, and how we do it, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you.
Really good.
Since you're only a fellow for a year, how do you keep the continuity in the projects that you work with? question is that are any of you hired then afterwards in the ministries where you work?